From Knives Out to Succession, social satires about the uber-rich have dominated our screens as of late, sparking think pieces, video essays, and probably a fair amount of heated family discussions. Eat the Rich has become the new catchphrase on Vogue. Among these class commentaries is The White Lotus, which debuted in 2021 and returned last October for its second season. While the first season focused on wealth, class dynamics, and colonization through its Hawaiian setting, the second season moves to Sicily, the home of mafia myths and machismo. This season of The White Lotus still focuses on the uber-wealthy, but swaps colonialism for gender politics in a close examination of sex and power. Lust and desire form the core of the show and raise issues from cheating husbands to evil gays.
Do you know these gays? Do you know these gays?
This video is going to look at those core themes of money, sex, and power. Who wields power? Who thinks they wield power? And what happens when the power dynamics are upended? We're going to talk a lot about love, sex, lust in The White Lotus and really get in touch with those emotions. And speaking of getting in touch with yourself, today's video is brought to you by Lelo. Lelo makes luxury sex toys. Whether you're single, you're taken, you're fooling around, or you recently went through a breakup, Lelo has the toys for you. Toys are a great way to add some spice, some variety to your love life, whether that is solo or multiplayer. You know me, one of the messages of this channel is celebrating sexuality and destigmatizing sexualities that have been pushed aside or demonized in the past, like female sexuality or queer sexualities. Lelo is also about breaking down taboos and shame around sex and pleasure. So what a perfect fit, whether you're a Tanya, a Harper, or Lucia. Pleasure should be accessible to everyone, and that's where Lelo can help you take things into your own hands, literally. Lelo sent me a couple toys to try out, and I'm going to talk about one of them today. I particularly like the Enigma Cruise, which, as the name suggests, takes you on a journey through the smooth, blissful waves of pleasure. It's USB rechargeable and fully waterproof, and I'm so glad it's rechargeable because nothing is worse than when you're trying to have a fun time and the batteries start to die. The Enigma Cruise is a dual stimulation sonic massager, so it stimulates both the G-spot and the clitoris, and I'd never used something like this before, so I was a little intimidated, but it's really straightforward to navigate and you can definitely ease yourself into it. There's a lot of sex puns in this section, and I swear, not all of them are intentional. Some of them are just popping up. They're just slipping right in. It has 8 different vibration settings, and it also has cruise control technology, which makes sure that the intensity of your session never drops. Whether you're flying solo on Valentine's Day or you're playing with a partner, Lelo can make sure that you have endless fun and pleasure. If you've ever been curious about exploring new parts of yourself, I highly, highly, highly recommend seizing the opportunity to get Lelo's toys at great discounts because they are having a Valentine's Day and 20th birthday sale. Be sure to check out the link in the description if you're interested and peruse their sale and treat yourself. It's no secret, and I hate to admit it, but Freud wasn't 100% wrong when he said that we are all obsessed with sex. And it makes up the core of The White Lotus's themes and subject matter. Sex is so prominent, I'm surprised it's not credited in the title sequence, but the sex scenes aren't only present to titillate the viewers. In The White Lotus, sex is used as a tool and a currency. Most of the time, it's not for any personal connection, but a way of manipulating people and circumstances. This manipulation and dishonesty is introduced through the Sicilian myth of Testa di Moro.
And Moore came here a long time ago and seduced a local girl. But then she found out that he had a wife and children back home. So because he lied to her, she cut his head off.
The busts that symbolize this myth and all its manipulation and sexuality loom over the characters. They're tucked into corners of the frame or placed front and center, cut between scenes where we see these sexual politics at play. The majority of the relationships we see in the show are transactional, some quite literally. Dominic and Cameron pay Lucia and Mia to sleep with them. Valentina and the rest of the White Lotus staff are paid to tend to the guests every beck and call. Portia is paid to look after Tanya. Money is central to other relationships too, though it's not as overt an exchange. Albie dangles a glowing endorsement of Dom's behavior over his head in return for €50,000, which he in turn gives to Lucia, and there's an implied expectation that Lucia will be his girlfriend. Cameron invites Ethan on holidays, not to reconnect with an old college buddy, but to get his hands on Ethan's newly acquired fortune. Greg is only with Tanya for her money, and the gays she befriends are after her fortune too. Sex is often involved in these monetary transactions, even if the people involved aren't always aware of the transactional nature of their relationships. Lucia and Dom, Lucia and Cam, Lucia and Albie, Mia and Giuseppe, Mia and Valentina, Jack and Quentin, Jack and Portia, Tanya and Nicolo, Tanya and Greg. The fact that there are 4 sex worker characters in the show speaks to how important the transactional nature of sex is to the themes of the show. Even removing the element of money, sex is used to establish power dynamics. Cameron used to sleep with Ethan's crushes in college as a way of putting himself above Ethan and continues to flagrantly flirt with his wife in front of him. Harper, Ethan, Cameron, and Daphne all use sex as a way of revenge on their partner. And in Daphne's words,
"Do whatever you have to do, not to feel like a victim of life."
The White Lotus is a steamy show, and there's been a lot of media devoted to dissecting and even ranking its sex scenes. There's also been articles about the prosthetic penises that the cast members wear. So the intense attention to the sex in the show makes us ask ourselves if we're really that different from the characters in the show, or are we just as sex obsessed and horny? The show takes the notion money can't buy happiness and places it front and center. A lot of the characters, despite being in a beautiful luxury resort, are constantly complaining or frustrated with their circumstances, and they all want more. More love, more fun, more sex, more. They barely even leave the hotel to take in the beautiful Sicilian landscape and culture, and they don't really eat anywhere but the hotel restaurant. Tanya tells Portia,
You know, when you're empty inside and you have no direction, you'll end up in some crazy places, right? But you'll still be lost.
As Aubrey Plaza and Will Sharp say in their HBO interview, we have this assumption that going on holidays or leaving the country will fix all of our problems or at least make us forget about them for a while, but that's not true. Our problems are inside us, and they follow us wherever we go. If you feel lonely and sad and worthless at home, a change of scenery might just mean you feel lonely and sad and worthless, but with an ocean view. That's not to say that I wouldn't accept an all-expenses-paid trip to a 5-star luxury resort to ride out my depression waves, but unlike the first season, the people who come away the happiest are the working class characters, Mia and Lucia. They also set themselves apart from the other characters because their relationship is positive and genuine, and they truly love each other without any need for manipulation or power plays. Mia, Lucia, and Valentina are the only way in of seeing the affluent characters from a different perspective. The first season had much more perspective from the hotel staff, but in season 2, the staff are quite literally pushed to the margins. And besides Valentina, clips of hotel staff are largely kept for transitions from one location to another. And in a way, it makes us inhabit the perspective of the rich characters even more, as, like the guests, the staff fade into our background and we don't take much notice of their daily efforts. As people who've recently come into great wealth, Harper and Ethan act as a way into the lives of the uber-rich for the audience. They start off with this moral superiority that could mirror that of the audience. Daphne and Cam's ignorance and apathy is so strong that they can't even remember if they voted. And like a lot of us watching, Harper and Ethan roll their eyes at their ignorance is bliss mentality. Harper is an employment lawyer who works on sexual harassment claims. She works with the Hispanic Federation to set up a charity, and Ethan's there too. He works in tech. In the first couple episodes, Harper is reading the Lost Children Archive, a book that details a married couple's road trip across the U.S., and it was inspired by the separation of children from their parents at the Mexican-U.S. border. But by the end of the holiday, Harper is no longer entrenching herself in political and social discourse. She chugs wine and cheats on her husband. Ethan also spends a night partying with Cameron, Lucia, and Mia, doing drugs and bearing witness to his friend's adultery before committing adultery himself a few days later. In the show's finale, Harper and Ethan do the very thing they abhorred and choose to live in ignorant bliss, turning a blind eye to each other's potential infidelities because it's easier. Because we start off aligned with Harper and Ethan, these character arcs force us to ask ourselves, would we go through the same transformation? If we had the means to ensure our security and our happiness in the face of global threats, would we also choose to live in ignorant bliss? We can watch the show and laugh at the stupidity or the audacity of rich people, but something that connects us all is the raw humanity and emotion that's at the center of the characters. And it's not unlike an episode of Real Housewives or Keeping Up with the Kardashians, where we scoff at the amount of money they spend without a second thought, but our hearts might break a little when we hear them share their tales of abuse or miscarriage or trauma or other deeply human and universal experiences. It may be near impossible to make out Tanya across the vast wealth gap, but her loneliness and her deep desire to be loved is a rope bridge that connects us all. Just like the first season's setting in Hawaii lended itself to colonial and racial commentary, Sicily brings up ideas of a romantic homeland, of mafia myths and machismo. There's a really interesting play between overt sexism and covert sexism, and the men who might pat themselves on the back for being allies to women or being one of the good guys might not be as progressive as they think they are. Through the 3 generations of the DeGrasso men, we're able to trace shifting social attitudes and norms towards women. Bert, Dominic, and Albie are 3 Italian-American men who go to Sicily to trace their roots. Bert is hoping for some grand homecoming and wants a woman to hold him and tell him everything's okay. Spoiler alert, that's pretty much the opposite of what ends up happening. Bert is the most shameless in his pursuit of women. He openly ogles young women and hits on them, telling them that they're beautiful after they just met. He loudly professes his horniness to his son and grandson and holds the belief that voracious male sexual appetites are natural. It's later revealed that Bert cheated on his wife, Dom's mom, throughout his childhood, but belittles the encounters to peccadillos. Dom talks about the harmful model it set for his own behavior.
You never showed me how to love a woman. You never showed me how to be intimate. You never showed me how to put others first. You always put yourself first. Always. So I did the same thing.
Dominic is a sex addict, and initially when he said this, I was skeptical because there's been a pattern of men using sex addiction as an excuse for their actions and especially mistreatment of women. But in interviews, both White and Michael Imperioli, the actor who plays Dominic, agreed that he is an addict. And I think it's interesting to consider because you do see the cycles of indulging and then the shame that follows, the lies he tells to cover up his behavior, which are all staples of addiction. Dominic's infidelities have taken their toll on his marriage, and his wife and daughter are notably absent from the family trip. I think it's interesting that his daughter didn't go on the trip, but his son did, which makes me think that maybe because Albie is a guy, he's able to kind of push his emotions down or brush them aside in favor of, I don't know, a fun time. Albie tells his dad that he needs to stop sleeping around, and he's determined not to follow in the footsteps of his father and his grandfather. Albie is the self-proclaimed nice guy of the show. He literally uses the words nice guy to describe himself.
I refuse to have a bad relationship with women.
Yeah.
He hails himself to be a feminist ally of women, but as the season progresses and we see how his relationships with Portia and Lucia play out, it's clear that this feminism is performative. He does the same thing as his father and his grandfather by putting women on a pedestal and viewing them as objects of fantasy instead of people. He says these grand, sweeping statements about misogyny and culture, but he lacks the self-awareness to reflect on his own behavior and how he also engages in these sexist or toxic masculine behaviors. He tears apart The Godfather in what sounds like a regurgitated monologue from a think piece he read. He doesn't recognize that the very fantasy he denigrates is the same fantasy he creates in saving Lucia from Alessio. After he gives Lucia money, he thinks that she might be his girlfriend after, and though he berates his father for trying to buy the affection and forgiveness of his mom, he doesn't realize that he is also trying to buy women's affection. And he's worse than Dom because he doesn't see anything wrong with the way he acts. He thinks that he was conned. He doesn't realize that he wasn't entitled to anything in the first place. Granted, Lucia did manipulate him, but Dominic is caught in the middle of the men because he's more self-aware. He's able to pinpoint the root of the problem in his own life on a personal level instead of conflating everything to the political. Dom knows he has to change and vocalizes that several times, and though he makes mistakes, he's aware of what he's doing wrong. It doesn't reduce the gravity of his actions, but we can sympathize with him more than Albie, who thinks women are pretty wounded birds instead of people. Something interesting I found in the men's attitudes is that of all the interactions Mia and Lucia have with the DeGrasso family, Bert's relationship with Mia is the most wholesome and sincere of them all. He may be the most traditional and aggressive of all the men, but he's also the only one to applaud Mia's singing and see past her appearance. And ironically, despite partaking in the most overt objectification, he connects with her on a personal level more than the others. Albie and Dominic's shared attraction to and relationships with Lucia links them and highlights their similarities. Obviously, at the end of the series, Mike White signals to us that deep down, the men really aren't that different, as they all turn to check out a young, attractive woman who passes them in the airport. The overt versus covert misogyny of the DeGrasso men is also visible in Cameron and Ethan. Cameron is the most obvious sexist, a proud chauvinist who says half of sexual harassment claims are fake and hits on anything that moves. He has an insatiable appetite and a tendency to overindulge in everything. He thinks he's untouchable because he's rich, but it seems like his bravado is masking insecurity. Ethan challenges him, saying that he slept with his crushes in college to make himself feel better and put himself over Ethan.
You have a bad case of something called mimetic desire.
What's that?
If someone with higher status than you wants something, it means it's more likely that you will want it too.
You do not have higher status than me.
Not then, maybe. I mean, I was smarter than you. Maybe you thought that fucking women I had a connection with would make you smarter.
This need to be on top is visible in his domineering physicality. He's always grabbing Ethan or kissing him on the cheek as a way of emasculating him. There's a constant tension and competition between the men. They're constantly trying to one-up each other in tiny ways. And even though Ethan pretends like he's above it all, he still has this desire to kind of pull one over on Cameron for putting him down all those years in college. Daphne says,
I'd hate to be a man, honestly. I'd just be so lonely. I mean, they're so competitive. It's like, can they even be friends with each other? I feel sorry for men, you know? It's like, they think they're out there doing something really important, but really they're just wandering alone.
the jet ski face-off is the epitome of this. The drones, the slow motion, the close-ups, and the epic dramatic score frame this as some deathly combat or grandiose event, but it's neither of those things. They're grown men playing chicken on jet skis. They build up these layers of self-importance and fake high stakes around them to feel like they're doing something meaningful when all they're doing is playing a children's game. Ethan and Albie are the same, both possessive over their women while masquerading as and convincing themselves that they are feminists. Ethan reveals himself to be the same as Cameron, bitter and resentful and jealous and insecure. Ethan and Harper embroil themselves in the same manipulation and games as Cameron and Daphne, even after congratulating themselves on their moral superiority and their superior relationship. Like the DeGrasso men, Ethan and Cameron aren't really that different from one another once you strip them of their macho bravado and nice guy facades. The only way Harper gets Ethan's attention is to make him feel emasculated and spark a need to prove his masculine prowess. Harper and Ethan are stuck in this cycle of feeling inadequate and not knowing what they did wrong. Ethan's always glancing at Harper to gauge her reactions or her state of mind, and Harper is continuously making efforts to reach out and to reconnect, especially physically, and it's really sad to watch her being shut down again and again. There's a moment in the first episode where Ethan is visibly frustrated with Harper's attitude, and the moment Cam and Daphne leaves the room, he looks at her and you can just see her crumble, where she knows she's upset him and she looks so defeated because she doesn't really know what she did wrong. It's like nothing she could do is right in his eyes and she can't make him happy, and it's so heartbreaking to see her so defeated. And anyone who could do that to Aubrey Plaza is an enemy of mine. I love that woman. Maybe Tanya was right when she said,
Women are kind of depressing.
Oh. You think?
Yeah, I think most women are drips. But it's not their fault. They have a lot to be depressed about.
I could talk for hours about The White Lotus, on everything from its symbolic title sequence to the natural imagery to the costuming, so I had to limit myself in these 3 topics or else I would just go on and on and on. But at the root of all the material is basically the notion that everybody's just horny all the time and everybody just wants to have fun and be loved. And if that strikes a chord with you, please be sure to check out Lalo, links in the description. Make yourself have a fun time. As always, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next video.